Hey guys, Jeff here again from vivahelp.live, here to talk about attributes and how we can help get you set up and moving as quickly as possible. In case you're not familiar, when you set up attributes in Viva Glint, you're basically defining the categories of information that describe your folks and allow you to kind of slice those results down and get to the heart of the matter. So you can kind of think of them like tags that you can help compare different groups together. Now, this is really neat because when it comes to attributes, you can customize this to a really high degree. You're going to have up to 100 custom attributes to utilize here. We're not going to be going terribly deep, but what I want to do is I want to talk about the different types of attributes so that way you kind of know what exists and how you can use what's already there and how you can sort of help build this stuff out for yourself. So let's jump right into it. The first thing that I want to talk about are the required attributes that are needed for every single upload that you're ever going to do. That's going to be status, first name, last name, employee ID, and email. When it comes to required attributes, these are often referred to in Viva Glint documentation, and it's because it's required. Next, let's talk about date-based attributes. These are attributes that store dates like hire date, birth date, promotional date, termination date. You have all different kinds of ways you can utilize this. This can be really handy because you can filter survey results down to a part where you think something might be happening. Glint handles dates in a little bit of a unique way because it has its own standard format, which is not like the US or the UK format. It is year, month, day. The good news is you can use the date that you prefer the most, but I want you to be aware that when you're exporting data, you're actually going to see dates come out like this. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. That's just kind of how the system is built, and it's an addition now where at least you're not forced to use this date when you're working with your files. You can use your data preference, which I think is a really good thing. One thing that I think the Viva Glint documentation might not do super well is we talked about how these attributes are required for every upload that we do. However, once you have attributes set as a date, you're actually going to need to include these as well. They come required in a different kind of way. We can leave these columns blank. That's totally fine, but you are going to need to include the attribute as you do your uploads, or else you're going to get an error. This can be especially confusing because, for example, if I take out date of promotion, let's say I delete it out and then I do an upload, Viva Glint will generate an error and it's going to say, hey, I see that there's a problem with termination date, hire date, and promotional date. Unfortunately, I'm not exactly sure why it does that, but I do want you to know that's expected behavior. You just need to include all of your dates in the header here, even if you're not going to fill out the information with it. Next, I want to talk about derived attributes. Attributes aren't directly imported, but calculated from other fields. So the idea is just to save some time and ensure consistency. So for example, if we have an hire date's an example of one, even though it's a date as well, this is also a derived attribute. So let's say, for example, you have somebody that was hired on January 1st of 2020. They're going to be landing in the bucket of 3 to 5 years. That's a tenure bucket. So when we feed Viva Glint hire date, you can derive that attribute so that way you have a tenure bucket. So as you look through all your employees, it's going to automatically calculate how many years of service these employees have with you. Next, here are some optional attributes that you might want to take advantage of. Personal email is one where for some users who maybe are not connected to Microsoft 365, this gives them an option to log in if that's something that you like. And they can also receive additional notifications on their personal email as well. Time zone is something that can be really handy because if you're a large organization where you have users all around the world and with different time zones, it helps ensure that invites for surveys get sent at appropriate times. Now, I want to take some time to talk specifically about the hierarchy attributes. Hierarchy attributes define how people and teams are structured inside the organization. That's because in Viva Glint, they decide who rolls up under who and how those results are grouped together. This can be really handy because, for example, a sales manager in Chicago would see the results for just their sales team. However, a VP of sales would be able to see results aggregated across the entire sales team globally. So there's a lot of different ways that you can slice this up, but as you can see, I took an example from some of the Viva Glint documentation, and these are just some example hierarchies you can take advantage of. This way you'll be able to drill down to site, city, country. However, feel free to change this accordingly. These are just examples that I'm providing, so that way we have something to talk about. The one thing I really want to emphasize, though, is that when you are setting up your hierarchy, you really need to get it right on your first attempt. The reason is because, unlike attributes in general, when we talk about standard attributes, we can go ahead and add new attributes at any time. We can go ahead and add new date attributes at any time. However, when it comes to the hierarchy, we don't have the ability to change that on our own just yet. That may come in the future, but as of right now, if you set up your hierarchy and you decide to make changes to it, you're going to need to open up a ticket with Viva Glint, and it's going to take some time because they're going to have to go ahead and make a request. That's going to need to go off to the engineering team, and those changes have to get done on the back end. So do your very best to try to predict what you think that you're going to do. Now, it's not the end of the world if you do need to make a change, but just be aware you're going to have to open a ticket up to do that. Now that we've done that, I want to prepare this for an upload. So that way we can actually see this work and have an idea of what you need to do. Now, you'll notice that I included a lot of employees here, but actually I'm not interested in that. So what I'm going to start by doing is I'm actually going to be deleting all of the employees except for just one. And that's old Albert Einstein here. So there's a couple of things that we're going to be going over here. For one, I'm just leaving the manager ID blank because we're going to be covering manager hierarchy in a different video. But this is actually really important, and I want to kind of return back to the date attributes for just a moment so that way you can prepare this. One thing we talked about is that I'm going to be using the US date format. But what's really important for you to know as you're setting up your attributes is that Viva Glint doesn't know that something is a date just based by the title. Okay, the only way it can know it's a date is if there is a date inside of it. Why is that important? Well, when you think about termination dates, people or different admins will use their employee lists to create these. However, that termination date field is always empty, and so when they're setting it up, it actually never gets detected as a date because it's empty. So regardless of whether or not somebody is actually terminated, we still need to put a date in there because we're setting this up. So let me demonstrate that for you here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to type in 12/15/1999. Okay. So I have used a US date format, and when we go ahead and upload this, it's going to go ahead and detect it as a date field, which is great. And I'm going to do one more over here. I'm going to put in, for the date of promotion, I'm going to put in, use the 4th of July in 1998. Okay. Now I want you to pay really close attention here when I click off of this. You'll notice that Excel went ahead and removed those zeros for us. This is something that Excel does all the time, as you're probably aware. It's going to go ahead and reduce that stuff down. This actually is a problem for us. So this is something that we need to make sure that as you're making changes within Excel, if that's where you're doing your CSV management, you're going to need to go ahead and set this up so the date format works accordingly. Let's show how that works. So if I select these 3 date fields here, I can go ahead and right click on it. I can go down to Format Cells and I can go to Custom. And this is where I can actually type this in. So if I do month, day, year, and I hit OK, it's going to add those zeros back. Viva Glint does need to see those zeros, so that way it picks up the date format correctly and processes as you would expect. Okay, but let's say, for example, that you decide, oh, I'm going to be sticking with the Viva Glint format because that works better for us. If I highlight everything, I right click on it, and I go back to Format Cells, I can actually type that in here where I go year, month, day, which is the Viva Glint format. And when I hit OK, it's going to automatically reformat all of that for me. So there are a lot of attributes that you may want to add. This is just an example here. So you can go ahead and add stuff as you're getting prepared, but just be aware when it comes to non-hierarchy based stuff, you can add additional attributes down the road. Now that we have this set up, I'm going to go ahead and get an upload created for us, and I want you to follow right along. Okay, so now that we're back in Viva Glint, it's time for us to go ahead and do an import. To do that, we're going to go to the configuration panel. We're going to click on the people page, and then I'm going to go right here to import. I want to mention that if you're setting this up for the first time, these 2 tiles will not exist. It's actually going to be only attribute updates first, and so we're going to go ahead and select that. It's going to ask for our file, and so I'm going to go ahead and pick the file that we used. And then once we have it loaded up, we can go ahead and hit continue. When we pull this up here, we're going to see a summary of everything that we have in the file already. So this is all correct. I only had 1 user because I'm not really concerned about users. I'm setting up attributes right now. This can be a little bit confusing because it does shorten the names a little bit, but that's okay. We know that they're there and we know that's what we're actually looking for today. One thing I want to highlight for you is that you should be seeing this new square whenever you're putting something new in. That might seem obvious, right? But the one thing that I want you to really be aware of is if you see new, let's say under something like hire date or termination date, if you see new, you should not continue forward. What it usually means is that there is some type of case difference. So Viva Glint is case sensitive. I'm going to show you an example of this a little later, but just be aware if you see new on something that is not new, do not continue, stop what you're doing and figure out what went wrong so that way you don't end up creating duplicate attributes. In this case, I know these are indeed new, and so I'm going to go ahead and hit continue. But before I do that, I almost forgot one thing. It's really important that for these dates to be detected properly, I tell Viva Glint, hey, this is my date format. I want you to recognize dates that are listed in this format. Now that I've done that, I can actually go ahead and continue. So here inside of Viva Glint, it's going to give us the option to set up our attributes. Now, I really recommend that you stick with the default naming scheme. Technically, you can change it to something different. And so maybe it makes sense for you to, instead of having last name, to say family name, depending on your organization structure or whatever, right? That's fine. You can do that, but I would be really wary of changing this from the defaults only because it seems to create confusion for folks down the line if there's new members on the team, if it passes off to different management or whatever. So you're going to come in here. If it's not pre-filled out already, you're going to want to go down and pick first name. You're going to want to go down and pick last name, and so on and so forth. Derived attributes, what we talked about earlier, where that information is calculated from existing attributes. I'm going to go ahead and set up tenure groups. So in this way, I'm going to go ahead and click on this. I'm going to be clicking on the down field, and then I'm going to be finding hire date here. So the tenure groups are going to be derived off of hire date. When it comes to age groups, it's going to be very similar. I'm going to be coming down here, and I'm going to be looking for year of birth. So I have year of birth set up there, and age groups are going to be derived from year of birth. Here are the optional system attributes. So we didn't talk about this earlier, but you do have the ability to set up survey language, and you have the ability to set up dashboard language. So if this is important to you, these are attributes you can set up for that. And there's actually, Viva Glint has supported language codes. There's a Learn article on that, so that way you can know exactly what codes you need to fill out for folks who have different languages that you want to take advantage of. Now, as far as user time zone, if I want to take advantage of this, I want to go ahead and I want to click on that. And I'm going to go ahead down and find time zone. Same with personal email. You don't have to take advantage of this, but if you want to, you might find that there are some useful things that come from it. So I'm going to pick personal email. Okay, great. Now, this is an example that I talked about earlier. You cannot change your hierarchy. This is the hierarchy that I already set up, and I cannot change it. I'd have to open a ticket and have engineering do this on the back end if I wanted something to change. But in your version, if you've never set this up before, these are going to be blank drop downs just like these up here. Okay, so when you're coming down here, you can select the hierarchy that makes sense for you. If you want to utilize the setup that I had, for example, you could pick the drop down, you'd select business unit, you'd pick this drop down, department, team, and so on and so forth. The other thing here is you're also going to have a drop down for manager ID. So when you set these up once, like I say, there is not an easy way to change this, but just make sure you get this correct on the first shot, so that way you can save yourself some trouble. When I hit continue here, I'm going to get a summary of everything that I get. So I'm going to see hierarchy group mappings, optional system attributes mappings, derived attribute mappings. And then here at the top, here's my required attributes. And if I scroll up, you're going to see all the different test attributes that we've utilized for various purposes over the years. If this all looks good to you, then you can go ahead and continue. Now, this is an area where people have a lot of questions about this. You have two options. You can save the attributes and import the employee data, or you can save attributes and discard employee data. My personal preference is to just save the attributes and discard the employee data. You also might remember I deleted all of the employees except for Albert Einstein, so there's really nothing significant there. But you need to set up your attributes first. Some users may be taking advantage of HRIS systems where they're just going to be doing an SFTP over to Viva Glint, which is something that we're going to be covering in a different video. You will not be able to do any SFTP transfers unless your attributes are already set up. So you need to go through this process first before you can do any uploads utilizing that method. For now, I'm going to just go ahead and hit Save Attributes and discard employee data. Or rather, I would if I didn't already have this set up. In this case, you could go ahead and hit Save Attributes only, but for me, I'm actually going to go ahead and cancel this out. But don't you worry, the attribute fun is not over just yet. We're going to go ahead and talk about it a little bit more. Now, assuming that I have had a successful upload, I can go and look at all of my attributes here. So if I click on Actions, Manage User Attributes, I can now go ahead and see everything that we have up here. One thing in particular that I really want to highlight at this point, though, is that Glint is case sensitive. So I set this up earlier so we could come to it because I want to show you that Office and Office exist. They are not the same thing. So if you're ever dealing with something that seems really confusing, ask yourself, do I maybe have a duplicate attribute? You can go to Manage Attributes and you can take a look here. So in this case of Office and Office, oh boy, well that can get really confusing really quickly. Trying to understand how that happened is important, but if you have multiple people working, usually what ends up happening is somebody had a typo when they did an upload and they just didn't realize it. So going back to that situation that I showed you during the initial upload, if it says new and you say for a fact, hey, I know Office isn't new, okay, or I know Office isn't new, you should stop yourself and look and see what's going on, because you're about to make a duplicate attribute and that can cause a lot of confusion. If you ever are in this situation, you can rename attributes, which is really cool. I want to show you what happens though if I try to name it the same thing. Let's see what happens. Okay, I get an error. So I can't combine them. I also can't delete them. This is also one of those things when it comes to Viva Glint that if for some reason you need an attribute deleted, you're going to have to open a ticket and make a request, and the engineers will have to do it on the back end. The good news is that for examples like Office here, this is not a required field. So it's not a date. So we can kind of ignore it if we want to, but what we would do is we would say Office duplicate, if I can spell here. Okay, so I have Office duplicate. At least now I know that this is something that we don't want to use. Or we can also follow my favorite naming scheme here. I can delete duplicate and I can throw ZZ at the end. Okay, so now that I've done that, I know that I don't plan on using this. This is out of the way. I can always come back and rename it to something useful later. So you can rename it and then you can start using it and populating it with data if you like, but just be really, really cognizant of the fact that it is much easier to create a duplicate attribute than you think. So just be mindful, stick with a scheme of every attribute starts with a capital letter or something, talk about it with folks inside of your office that these things are case sensitive, and so no sense in creating trouble for yourself. Okay. Just to kind of clarify, in the case that we talked about, now that I've done ZZ Office, I can do my uploads. I don't need to worry about including this at all. I can just kind of ignore it and it can be in the background. But at this point in time, you don't have the ability to delete it. One of the other things I also wanted to reiterate is that even though I upload my files in a US date format, when I'm coming in here and looking at my user attributes, you can see that Glint spits it back out at me at the Glint format with the year, month, and day first. This is how we know that it is definitely being recognized as a date attribute, because it's showing it back to me as the Glint format. If it was showing me something different, like a US date format, something might have happened, or maybe it was never set up initially as a date format. These things can get a little bit tricky. Termination date is actually one of those examples here. We kind of did this as a demo, right? But it's actually set up as a regular attribute. It's not recognized as a date format. And we know that because, well, we don't see any dates in here. It can't be a date format if there's nothing in there. The last thing that I want to talk about for this video here is how we can make changes to certain areas. So for example, I can come in here, I can at least make changes to derived attributes. So for example, let's say I made a mistake, or maybe we have a different attribute that is more accurate that we want to, base our tenure groups off of. You can actually come in here and change that. So that's something that is really helpful. Same thing with optional system attributes. You can come in here and make changes to that. The things that are, challenging are the hierarchy groups. These things you cannot make changes to. So just kind of be aware of that. Well, I know that was a lot. I hope that that was clear. I know this stuff can be confusing. Just try to take your time with it and try to focus on, the attributes that are most important with you. Just to kind of go over the takeaways again. You have some flexibility when it comes to adding attributes, of course. Where you don't have flexibility is hierarchy groups. So this is the one where when you're setting this up for the first time, make sure you take the time to set it up the way that you want. That way you'll be able to avoid any need for a ticket with Microsoft support, which is going to take quite a bit of time to fix. Hey there. If this tutorial saved you time or saved you a little money, I have a Buy Me a Coffee page if you want to support the channel. I mean, you don't have to, but it's there if you want to. And if you need a bit more hands-on help with Viva Glint, I also offer consulting. So check out the link in the description for details, and thanks again for watching.